All right. Hey, everybody. We're going to go through working remotely, aka socially isolated programming. Um, so, first up, my name is Orta therox. I'm an engineer. I've been doing programming in general for maybe 15, 18 years. It's been a while. In that time, I've kind of focused a lot of my life on doing like large-scale open source projects. So some of the big ones are CocoaPod's a dependency manager for iOS projects, and Danger, which is a sort of tool that once you start getting into big teams, you kind of have a set culture, and you want to be like, hey, every time we make a changelog, every time we make a pull request, we make a changelog entry. Well, something like Danger helps you do that. Last year, I shipped a really fun big game called Flappy Royale. Had millions of plays, and right now I work at Microsoft on the TypeScript team, where I am a engineer that was hired remotely as the only person in New York City, whilst the majority of the team work in Seattle. So I'll be talking a lot about my experiences in the TypeScript team, but I'll also be talking a lot about my job before TypeScript, which was at a startup called Artsy, where I worked for about 8 years, and that role ranged from being an individual contributor to being a team manager, and throughout that time I spent a lot of time either remote or managing remote engineers. It's worth noting ahead of time that I actually don't have much chill, so a lot of what I'll be talking about is ways in which other people should be doing remote work rather than how I specifically do it, and we'll kind of contrast what those look like and where a healthy balance lives. So to get started, let's have a think about the time that we have in a day. So in this case, we have a nice long timeline. At the start of it, you wake up. At the end of it, you go to sleep. This is basically somewhat around 16 hours. And what generally happens is you kind of have a point in the day normally where you arrive at the office, and then you have a point in the day when you leave the office. And this is generally what we call a work day. This is the working 9 to 5 from Dolly Parton, and what until this pandemic hit has almost been the most people's work scheduling system. And one of the things that's tricky here is that remote workers kind of played with this a lot, and this actually more accurately reflects my day yesterday. So I woke up in the morning, I went and checked my emails, answered a few questions on GitHub, made breakfast, and then went back and did an hour or two, made lunch, went back and did an hour or two, sat and hung out with my wife, took a shower, and played with the dog a little bit, and then did a big chunk of work, and then sort of wrapped up for the evening generally, and then just before I went to bed, I went back and double checked on all of the sort of the things that have been happening and tried to keep on top of that. And generally speaking, this is not a good pattern. And what we're going to be talking about is ways in which we can avoid this, and to try and make sure that you have a consistent, normal work-life balance that gives you gratification in the things that you do, gets your deadlines done, but at the same time doesn't completely take over your life. So to get started, we're going to first start thinking about what it's like to work remote when doing code. So if you think about it, until recently, people that were remote were more of an outliers, and they had to sort of work in a different way in order to work with everybody else. And now that almost everybody's working remote, then it kind of means that everybody has to change their team's culture. So one of the first things that I learned, I've spent about 10 years working remote, was that I needed to be over-documenting everything I did. And in part because it feels like when you're communicating with other people, you're kind of going out of their way when they are doing something else. Think about it as when you're in person, you can tap someone on the shoulder and you get their full time during that time period. But when it's computer to computer, it's generally a lot more asynchronous, and we'll play with this next. But you want to try and give as much information up front as possible. So when you're working, like actually adding code comments or like putting more effort into the README or updating the docs when you see they're out of sync is actually a really valuable skill. The next one is aim for async, and this is skills for life. Like, not asking to ask for something, but instead just asking for something. So it wouldn't be like, hey, are you free on an IM? It would more be like, here's my problem. I'll show you later some messages that I've sent in Teams, that Microsoft's version of Slack or Discord or whatever, that account for how this works. Learning when to stop seeking is a general skill that will be very valuable for you for the rest of your life. And like, I can't tell you when to stop, but part of the problem is when you're beginning to program in a new environment. So this was me when I joined the TypeScript team. This is you in an internship. This could be, anybody joining a new job. Like, you spend a lot of time when you're on your own trying to figure out an entire system so that you can just make a small change. And a lot of the time, if you just pair with somebody, or just ask in a forum, or like your teams, then you can actually just get to the answer quite quickly, and as well get a more comprehensive answer to it. So it's like writing something asynchronously, but also telling people what you're trying to do and explaining how you found it is a really nice way to sort of get through to doing the thing that you want to do. Next up, aiming for the most public space. One of the great things about how most of us work is that you can balance working with people in different levels. So, you'll probably have a mentor if you're an intern. You would, have sort of favorite people on teams that you talk to a lot often. But a lot of the time, like when you ask a question, you should opt to try and do it in the most public space available. One of the advantages of this is that you get the chance to actually you don't have to know who's going to answer. For example, this is one I did yesterday where I'm just like, is this a bug? And post some code, post a link so that people can actually play around with it straight away. And within a minute, I got an answer. And I could have sent that message to like a specific person on the team, and then I would have maybe got an exact answer. But by doing it this way, I definitely got an answer very quickly, and that turned into the interesting conversation afterwards about like, what is this bug and why is it a thing? Next up, one of the things that I found very interesting was that working as a remote engineer made it much easier for me to be able to apply the same skills that I'd use on a day-to-day basis with working in open source. Now, this might not be a goal for you. You'll find out that this is definitely a goal for me. That like, I want my work to be like available in as many different spaces as possible, and I want everybody to be able to learn and improve on it. And by working asynchronously with the rest of your team, it's the exact same as working asynchronously with the rest of the world. And so those skills that you learn doing that will be just as applicable doing it like in your office versus with the rest of the world. That's one number one. Okay, let's look at balance. This one's going to be a tricky one, but it's also part of what makes like working remotely so valuable. One of the interesting things here is like you get to spend time however you want. And one of the cool things about that is, I have a dog and I get to spend time with my dog during the day. And that's really cool. The trade-off of that is that the dependencies are also some of the biggest distractions. And like, trying to find a space for yourself and your work in your environment can be tricky. And that's really something you'll have to try and balance yourself. For me, that is, if I'm down, I've got my headphones on, then I have my own office, and I'm in my office, then conceptually the door is closed. And I come out of it every so often and just say hi, just walk around, stretch my legs, not stare at a screen. But you really want to balance making sure that the things that make it great to work remote are also the things that don't make it annoying to work remote. And the other one that's balanced is about like balancing your time versus work time. So my opinion generally is that it is an anti-pattern to be constantly doing small bits of work all the time, especially when you're at sort of the beginning of your career, because like you want to kind of be finding a way to get yourself into flow work, which is like work that tends to be quite deep and you forget about time during that time period. And instead you can, do hard critical work. And this is optimized towards doing lots of small, short tasks that affect a lot of things. And my recommendation here, just do something. So what I have recommended for people before is to use boundaries. So that could be at the start of the day you do some exercise, at the end of the day you do some cook, and that time in between is your work time. You have a very solid start and you have a very solid end. In the same way that you would have had if you'd had been at an office. You'd have had I arrive in, I'm at the workstation, I do some stuff, I go to lunch, I then do some more stuff, and then I go and I leave. And outside of that, I'm basically out of office, because you are physically. But that's much harder to do when your office is your home. So you just have to find something. Like, that could be exercise, that could be walking the dog, feed kids, etc., etc. Like, the thing isn't important, it's the idea of a thing. And once you've found that, then you found like a nice ritual that sort of separates your sort of me time versus, company time versus me time again. And, you can be a little bit responsive on the phone before and after, but like ideally you have a time when you're on and a time when you're off. And these sort of boundary layers will act as bookkeeping points for you. Okay, so motivation. Whew. This is this isn't something that people tell you, but like trying to figure out how to get yourself motivated to do stuff is much less of a problem when you're working in an office than it actually is when you're working remote. And like generally there's two types of motivations. There is extrinsic motivation, e.g., I do things because a company pays me to do things, and that's great, and I'm doing things for them, and whether you like them or not, the motivations come from an external force, and that could be deadlines, milestones, we have agreed to do a thing, or just straight up like this is what's best for the product, and it doesn't matter if you necessarily agree with that. That's fine too. So trying to figure out like how to use extrinsic motivation is an interesting one, and for me, I try to think about it from mainly two perspectives, which is like understand what those motivations are coming from. So like, if it's a milestone or a deadline, like what is that why is that deadline there? Is it completely arbitrary? And if it is, like what is the reasoning for it? And what is the reasoning for the scope and the thing that you want? And that hits quite a lot into clarity too. Like being able to understand the reasons why an extrinsic motivation has been applied to you gives you a lot better way to introspect the actual motivation of it, and to help yourself feel like the thing that you're doing is important and has impact. And so that should hopefully help wake you up in the morning and feel like, working on the thing you work on is worth your time. And that's super valuable. In fact, being worth your time is the other one, right? Intrinsic motivation. And this is the thing that like mostly motivates me, which is, I joined the TypeScript team because I think TypeScript is a super interesting project that is growing really fast and taking over like this JavaScript ecosystem. And the stuff that I was seeing as an outsider was like very like compilery focused, but I needed a lot of ecosystem focus. And so I just pitched to the team that was something that I cared about, and that was something that I can help work on. I can be a compiler engineer and do this ecosystem stuff. And so trying to understand those a little bit more to be like, you need to take over sort of pain, grief, ideas and sort of internalize them through empathy, right? Like you have to care about what you're building and try to understand how all these pieces come together. And to get the intrinsic motivation from that, you need to really be like involved in the system. You need to care about your users. You need to care about the work that you do and feel proud about it. And for me, this is like a really strong sort of reason for getting to my keyboard in at any point in time, and is like super valuable for how all these pieces connect. And without sort of your intrinsic and your extrinsic motivation, then you might just spend all day on Reddit, right? No one's literally watching. You shouldn't do that, ideally, because you have extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. And like some of the emotions that like funnel into those will help you find a way to like provide the motivation for you to do stuff whenever you want to be doing stuff. And sometimes that can be hard because, you know, hey, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and sometimes it's always okay to not feel okay in an environment like this. And so trying to make sure that all that stuff is good can sometimes just be, yeah, I have to force myself to work some days, but forcing yourself to work some days just helps keeping the cycle running, as well as making it something that you can come back to when you're actually, you know, inspired and want to get stuff done. On the subject of that, supporting each other and supporting yourself as someone like new to an ecosystem, like you want to be thinking about how can I both provide like value to my mentors and the rest of my team, but also like how can you make it easy for them to provide me support. One of the things that I learned quite quickly was that learning when remote is hard, like in the sense of like I'm trying to learn a very complicated system. The TypeScript compiler is a good example. Every time I ask a question, I always ask myself, like, should I already know the answer to this? Are people going to think that because I don't know it, that I'm not smart? But realistically, as we'll find a bit later, no one cares. In the sense of like, no one cares negatively. Like people want to help, and everybody wants to be involved, and everybody wants to give you support. So you have to just learn that getting through that is hard, and asking for questions is totally fine. Getting to know your team is when you're remote is different from when you're in office, because first of all, you don't have physical presence, which we'll get to a bit later. But like actually trying to do any sort of like funny culture stuff requires active participation, not passive participation. And so that sometimes means, going out there and putting your name up for something like Microsoft has a Learn Day that's coming up this month, and so I saw a list of requests for people teaching something, and so I just put down 5 things and said like I could do 2 of these if somebody's interested. I have no idea, like I could, by passively engaging in it, I probably won't engage very much. By actively engaging in it, I get to know the team, I get to know the outer organization, and it puts a bit more pressure on me to actually go out and do stuff, but going out and do stuff is like part of the value add here. And if you want to like get to know the rest of the org, get to know the people, and try and understand how this entire like organization system, company work, well, realistically, that's an active thing, not a passive thing. No one, like, you can read emails all you want, but unless you're getting involved, then you're not really going to understand. And that talks a lot to culture. I think one of the things that like as companies grow, like culture first starts off as very amorphic. I've worked at startups all my life until Microsoft, so like, at a 3-person company, the culture is just, the 3 of you just talking together. At a 20-person company, that culture is a little bit more formalized, and, there starts to be teams. Get to like, 100, and suddenly people are like, oh, I don't understand the culture of that team. Get to Microsoft size, which if I recall was 14,000 engineers. No, wait, 14,000 engineers? Maybe 40,000 engineers? There's a 4 in there. And the 140,000? I don't know. Whatever. You just get to a point where like things have to start being explicit, and you start like being able to read documentation on how the teams work and why they work in different ways and why they've made different cultural trade-offs. At my previous company, Artsy, this is available for anybody to see. Once we hit, I think it was like 30 engineers, and we had a lot of new people coming in. We really wanted to try and take what decisions we'd made in the past, try and describe them, and try and like give people a sort of document that's ongoing for hopefully the rest of the dev team's life, to sort of, take the ideas that were good, show why we chose those decisions, and keep it there. This is all open source, so you can go read it. It's just artsy/readme and GitHub. There's going to be links at the end. And if your team doesn't have that, maybe because they had an entirely internal, in-person culture, maybe it's on you to help sort out and build one, or to request them to build one, because these things are super valuable for new people. The next bit is in part tied to the last one of culture. Like, networking in a water cooler work environment is tricky because, there is no water cooler in a centralized place for people to be chatting. And one of the techniques that we've always done at every company I've been is to make sure that there is ways to have back-channel banter. So let's take the TypeScript team, for example. In our teams, there is a general chat room. A general chat room is about TypeScript. Then there is a mildly off-topic channel, probably, which tends to be very related, but not specifically, hey everybody, you definitely have to read this. And then that sort of moves on to, there's a completely off-topic channel, and this off-topic channel is exactly what you're seeing here. It's like people talking about building bread, people talking about video games, or, working on their house. All these different bits allow people to sort of connect in ways that's not just specifically, I send you some code, you send me some code, oh great. Because, you have to work, and you should work and enjoy your work. There's also the spicy memes for Well-Typed Teams channel, which you might have spotted. I'm not going to actually show you that because that's a bit too spicy to put on the open net. But that's also a really good out for giving space for interesting culture to grow. And if your teams don't have this, you should be advocating for getting one. Maybe the spicy memes page, sure, but the other ones like the off-topic and a sort of a mildly off-topic channel help give you a space to not feel like you're always in a main channel asking questions. A lot of my actual about this TypeScript thing I don't understand questions just live in mildly off topic, because it means that most people don't need to read it, but the people that do monitor that channel will probably answer my question, as you saw, in a pretty reasonable time frame. So that's the internal culture. The larger outer culture for developers, it tends to be on Twitter, and so that is where that's where I find a lot of my sort of how do I keep up with people, what's going on in the world, how can we connect it all. It's all in there for me. And so my first recommendation is find people doing stuff you like. I know it's shockingly simple advice there, but I don't know your background or what ecosystems you're interested in, but find the people that are doing the stuff you like. Find the people that are doing stuff you want to do. Follow them, and from there, it's more how do you interact with these people? First one is don't look like a bot. I have I don't know, 18,000 Twitter followers. Almost every tweet I get some weird reply. So here's some solid rules to actually have a real conversation and not just be generally ignored. Do this stuff. That's great. And here's a list of people that I think generally are pretty interesting for you to follow that are tech related. Yeah, it's got a JavaScript focus, but that's my ecosystem. But all of these links are available in chat too. And I think with all of this, your remote goals are to try and get back to this lifestyle of a 9-to-5 instead of a sort of collaborated, consolidated everywhere style of programming, and that will help to give you a healthy life balance. And a healthy life balance is great because hey, you don't have to be defined by your work. I mean, if you are, sure, but you can find a nice balance of being a remote person on a remote team in a company that supports remote people and you can keep a life balance that's healthy, just as long as you find the way to make sure that these things are consolidated. All right. Thanks, folks. You have a good time now. Ciao.